Hi guys, and welcome back to part 3 of the tutorial. What we're going to do now is just briefly check that the entity we created in part 2 is working, that we can spawn it, and we're also going to plug it into a HUD debug message node just to make sure the X and Y coordinates are outputting correctly. We can't test the inputs at the moment until we create the next part of the script, so let's just move on with this. We're going to go to Entity, and if everything went correctly, you should have a map tutorial folder and your new map tutorial waypoint. So I'm going to drag that and drop that onto the map, and you can see we've got the W that we assigned as the editor icon in the tutorial. So we're going to go to flow graph create, and we'll just call it none for now because we're just debugging, and we're going to do add graph default entity. And now if everything went correctly, you should have your new flow graph node or connected to the entity. So we've got the two inputs. We've got activate, which is a boolean, so we can toggle it on and off. We have waypoint name, which is the string, so we can send a new waypoint name to the entity whenever we want to. And we have the X and Y output. So what we're going to do to test this X and Y output is we're going to do add node HUD display to the debug message, and we're going to make another one of those, which is Control-C, Control-V, just to copy paste it. We're going to plug the Y into the message of one and the X into the message of the other, and we're going to shift the bottom one down to say 100 just to make sure they're not on top of each other. I'm going to do a misc start node, and we're going to show. Okay, so that's all we need for the flow graph just to test this. Now before we do this, we're just going to make sure we're looking at the X and Y coordinates of where it's actually located. So X is 1172 and Y is 943. So hopefully if we jump in game, yeah, 1172 as you can see in the top left and 943. So it's now outputting the correct X and Y coordinates as it should do. So that's about all we can do just to test it right now. Now just to add a couple of things I didn't mention before is obviously now in the entity rollup properties we've got the model and we've got the waypoint name. So we can also assign a waypoint name there if we'd like to, although obviously the flow graph node will update this entry anyway. And we've got the model. So if you did want to assign the waypoint an actual physical model, you could do that. So let's just test that now. So open up a model, so rock large will do, and reload script. And you see now it's spawned this model on our waypoint. Now it's completely optional whether you do this or not, or whether if you've got the mapping already done and you just want to drop a waypoint on top of a particular landmark in your map, that's also fine. So we can also remove that and just reload script. Another thing to mention is if you've made any mistakes in your script, the easiest way to find out is to look in the console. With Lua, the console is your best friend for debugging your script. So the first thing you need to do is just to make sure that your log verbosity is set to 3. So log underscore verbosity, and you see mine is set to 3 already. So log verbosity 3 would set yours to 3 if it's not. Now if you've got any mistakes in your script, the console will tell you all about it. So let's just deliberately make a quick mistake in our script. So let's say we just change this to a capital S on self X and save it, and we go back and we reload the script. Now you see instantly the console's spitting out an error, and it's telling us line 36 there's an error, and it's attempting to index a global self and it's a nil value. So if we go back to our script again and we look line 36 here, we can see that there's a mistake. So we just simply correct the mistake, save it, and reload the script, and it's reloaded fine now. So just for future reference, if you ever have any problems with your scripts, just make sure you check the console. Anyway, we're going to be moving on to the next part of the tutorial now, which is creating the main entity, which we'll be using to collect all the data from the waypoint. We'll also be using it to invoke the material using invoke Flash on the actual handheld map itself, and it'll be responsible for collecting all the other data like the player's position and his rotation and heading and other things like that we need to make this work. So we're going to stop here and we're going to carry on and do that right now. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to create our new ent file for our new entity. So we're going to jump into Notepad++, and we're going to start the new ent file. So open bracket, entity, and the next line name equals map tutorial, and the script path is script equals scripts entities map tutorial .lua. We're going to do / and close that. We're going to go to File, Save As, and we're going to go back to the SDK. We're going to go to Game, Entities, change this to All Types, and we're going to do map tutorial.ent, so a new ent file, and save it. I'm going to close this and just jump back into the SDK to make sure it's there. Game, Entities, map tutorial, ent. Okay. The next thing we need to do is to create the actual map tutorial LUA script itself. So again, we're going to open up Notepad++. We're going to do File, New, and we're going to change the language to LUA. And we're going to start. So map tutorial equals, open curly brackets. Now we only need one property, which is going to be the map file path. Now we want to be able to do this dynamically so we can change the map per level, or on the fly during the level, or do anything else with it that we want to. For example, in the Apache avionics system, I think I had two different maps. One was a satellite map and one was a contour map, and I assigned some keys to it and I could switch between the two on the fly, which makes things a bit more interesting. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is assign properties equals, open curly bracket, and S for string, map file path equals, and we're just going to leave it blank for now. I'm going to close that with a comma, and we're going to assign an editor icon as well for sandbox free. So editor equals icon equals, and in this case there's one that's just called a T. It's one of the few nondescript ones, so I'm just going to use that. So T for bitmap, and close the curly brackets and comma, and close this section. And now we're going to start writing some functions. So the first function we need is the initialization function on init. So function map tutorial on init, and then two brackets, normal brackets, self activate 1. So we're just activating the entity on the initialization. The second one we need is the onUpdate function. Now on the onUpdate function we have two other functions we want to trigger on every frame. The first one is going to be called waypoints, which is going to deal with tracking the waypoint itself, and the second one is the map update function, which we're going to use to track the player's location and some other things. So we need to do function map tutorial on update, and the first one we want to trigger is self waypoints, and the second one is self map update, and we're going to end that function. Okay, the next function we're going to need is another event messenger function, which is basically going to take the map file path input from the flow graph compatibility section and feed it into the properties, so we can change the map on the fly as we discussed earlier. So we're going to do function map tutorial, this is much the same as the waypoint one, event underscore message, and we're going to do sender and msg for message, and we're going to feed that into the properties for the map file path properties. So we're going to do self properties s for string map file path equals msg, and we're going to end that function. Okay, this next set of functions is dealing with the waypoints. This is the first one, the first major function. So what we're going to do is we're going to write function map tutorial waypoints. And the first thing we need to do is to find the waypoint entity, and then we need to find its location. So what we're going to do first is to find the waypoint entity in the map. So local WP, so our variable WP, local variable, and what we're going to do is we're going to use system get nearest entity by class to find it in the map. So we're going to do system get nearest entity by class. Now the nearest entity by class has three parameters. The first one is the starting point, the second one is the radius, and the third one is the actual class you're looking for. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the player as the starting point, so G underscore local actor, and we're going to get his position. Next we're going to set the radius, so we're going to have a nice big radius so it finds the entity on any size of map, so 9999, bigger than any map that we can make in CryEngine. And thirdly, we're going to look for this particular class, which is the waypoint class. So map tutorial waypoint. We're going to close that. Okay, the next thing we need to do is to make sure that the map tutorial waypoint exists in the map, because if it doesn't, LUA is going to spit out a load of errors saying that it can't find it, and then any subsequent calculation we try and make on it is going to be null and void, and that's going to cause problems. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in a little servat to make sure that we can find it. So we're going to say if the local waypoint WP equals nil. So if it doesn't exist, then now the next little bit is going to take some foresight, because what we're going to do is the waypoint itself exists as an icon in the Flash file. Now if it doesn't exist, we don't want it to show, because obviously having a waypoint on the screen when there's no waypoint in the map is a bit stupid. So what we're going to do is we're going to make 2 frames in the Flash file later. The first frame is going to have the waypoint showing, and the second frame is going to have it not showing. There's not going to be a waypoint. So we'll be able to toggle between frame 1 and frame 2. So we're going to send a variable to Flash to say either yes, we want to show it on frame 1, or no, we don't want to show it, go to frame 2. So what we're going to do is self.wp on off. This is our new variable, and we're going to say 2 because frame 2 isn't going to have it. Now the next one is a return, which we're basically going to use to jump out of this function if it doesn't exist, so it doesn't keep looping through this function. So we're going to say return, and then we're going to say end for the oops, got return wrong, return, and then we're going to say end to end this if statement. So if WP doesn't exist on the map, if local waypoint doesn't exist, then it'll jump out of this function, and it'll also set the Flash file to frame 2 for the clip that we want. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to make sure the waypoint is active. You remember in the waypoint script we made it so we could toggle it on and off. So what we want to do is we want to access that information in this script. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a new variable, so self WP active, and we're going to reference the waypoint active status in the other script. So WP, because WP local WP is now the waypoint, because we found it earlier using get nearest entity by class, and we're going to reference waypoint active, which was the variable in that script file. Okay, so now we've got the activity on and off. We know whether it's on or off. We can actually set it up so we can make some changes depending on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to make another if statement. So if self WP active equals false, because it was a boolean, remember, then we're going to then turn the Flash icon off again, because we don't want to show it if it's not active. So self WP on off equals 2 to send it to frame 2. And we're also going to quit out of this function using return. So return end. Okay, so now we've got that bit. We need to make some calculations on the player's position. We need to find out where the player is, and we also need to find out where the waypoint is in relation to the player. Now, what we need to do is we've got the world position of the player and we've got the world position of the waypoint, but we want the local position of the waypoint relative to the player. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to make a new variable, local WP pos lock, and we're going to say g local actor. Now we're going to use 2 local. Now we're going to basically make this offset local. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a slot. So we're going to say slot 0, because we're not using anything in that slot, and we're going to attach the waypoint to the player temporarily. It's not a physical attachment, but it's just used for the sake of this calculation. So we're going to say WP get pos. So now we've got the waypoint's position local to the player's position, so it's relative. So if we rotate or we move in a different direction, the waypoint's always going to be offset in the correct position. So now we only need the X and the Y values for the waypoint, so we're going to do self WPX, new variable. I'm going to say WP pos lock X, so position local, the X of the position local variable, and we're going to say self WP Y equals WP pos lock y. So we've got the x and the y position, local x and y position of the waypoint. The next thing we need is the waypoint's name. Again, in the original waypoint script, we set it up so the waypoint's name was a property which we could manipulate by flow graph. So we're going to grab that property and use it in this script. So to do that, we're going to set up another variable, self wp name, and we're going to say wp, because that's the waypoint in this script, properties. So we're looking in its properties, and we're going to find the property string waypoint name. So now we have a copy of that in this script as well. And we're also going to turn the waypoint flash file on, because we want the icon to show if it exists. So we're going to say self wp on off equals 1. So send it to frame 1, and we're going to end. Okay, so that's for the waypoint function written. Now we're going to move on to the map update function. Okay, so we're going to start with the map update function. So function map tutorial map update. And the first thing we need to do is to get the map file path. So what we're going to do is local map file path equals self properties s map file path. So we've now got a variable copy of the properties that we defined at the beginning of the script. Now we also need to get the entity, the handheld map entity, which is the 3D model that we're going to project this flash onto. Now to do that, we're going to do get entity by name, and we're going to name it something like screen test. And in the game, we're going to name our model screen test as well when we have it in the map. So we know which entity we want to put the flash texture onto. So we're going to do local screen ent equals system get entity by name, and then, as I said before, we're going to call it screen test. Okay, and the next thing we need to do again is to make sure it exists, because if it doesn't exist, we're going to have problems again. So what we're going to do is simply do if screen ent equals nil, then return, oops, I keep spelling return wrong, return an end. So we're going to quit out of this function if it doesn't exist, so we won't get any problems. Okay, so next thing we need to do is to get the player's position again. So local pos equals g underscore local actor get pos. And we need the player's position x and y. So local pos x equals pos x, and local pos y equals pos y. Okay, so we've got the player's position. The next thing we need to do is to get his heading to see which way he's facing. So the best way of doing that is to get his vector for a start. So we're going to do local vector equals g local actor get direction vector 1. Oops, 1. Okay, so now we've got his direction vector, the direction he's facing in. We need to do a little bit of mathematics to convert that into something we can use for the flash file. Now, for the flash file, we want basically 0 to 180 or minus 180 back to 0 to have the full 360 rotation. So what we're going to do is we're going to use atan2, which is an arctangent function, and we're going to use pi, which is also in the LUA API for a common function. So we're going to do local heading, heading equals, now we're going to do negative math dot atan2, and we're going to apply that to the vector x and vector y variable. So vector dot x comma vector dot y, and then we're going to times that by 180, and we're going to divide that by pi. So math dot pi. You can find more information about these kind of calculations on the internet, like changing vectors to headings and bearings and stuff like that. There's quite a lot of information out there in mathematics. So if you run into anything like that, Google can help you find these kind of solutions. Okay, so that's the main part of this function written. The last part is to simply invoke the flash file using material flash invoke and sending it our function. So what we're going to do is screen ent, because that's our screen entity that we found earlier with get entity by name. And we're going to do material flash invoke. And we're going to say it's material number 0, slot 1, submaterial 0. And we're going to send it the function map nav. Now in Flash, our function is going to be called map nav to line up with this. So we need to send it some arguments now. We're going to send it the player's position X, the player's position Y. We're going to send the player's heading. We're going to send the map file path. We're going to send the waypoint X position local, the local position offset to the player, if you remember we worked that out earlier. And we're going to send the waypoint position, WPY. And we're going to send the waypoint's name, WP name. These are all the variables that we've been calculating throughout these two functions, so they're all now being sent to the Flash file as arguments. And finally, self.wp on off, which is our toggle. And we're going to end that function. Okay, so this is the last little bit now. All we've got to do is add some flow events. All we have for this particular entity is an input flow event, which allows us to send the name of the map or the file path of the map into the flow graph. So what we're going to do is map tutorial flow flow event. To bear with me, and we're going to do inputs equals open curly brackets, and we're going to say map image file path, which is what's going to show up on the node as the input, and we're going to call it, we're going to reference the function we made earlier, map tutorial event underscore message, capital M, and it's a string. So we'll close that and close that again, and we're going to deal with the outputs where there isn't actually any output, so we just put outputs equals open curly bracket, close curly bracket, comma, and finally one finally closed curly bracket to end this entity. Okay, so now we've got the entity written. We're going to go to File, Save As, and we're going to go, Game, Scripts, Entities, Map Tutorial, and this is Map Tutorial.lua. So make sure it's a Lua file again and save it. Okay, and we can close this window. We'll check back in the SDK again. So Game, Scripts, Entities, Map Tutorial, and we've got the other one, Map Tutorial Waypoint Lua. Okay, we're just going to jump in game quickly to make sure this entity loads correctly. So, and jump into Sandbox 3, and we're going to go Entity, Map Tutorial, and hopefully your Map Tutorial entity should show up. And we've got it showing up there, and we just reload the script. Oh, now we can see there's a problem. This is a classic example of why it's quite easy to make corrections when you make mistakes in Lua. If you read the error message, we're getting an error at line 57. There's a problem, so we won't make it open the file because it won't automatically open in Notepad++. So we'll close that for a moment, and we'll go back to Notepad++, and we'll go down to line 57, and we can see there's a problem here. I've put the commas spaced away from the numbers, so we're going to make a change to that. So we're going to 0, 1, and 0, comma. Now we're going to save that, and we're going to close it, and we're going to reload the script, and we're going to it's going to crash out a minute because we've made a correction. It often does that, so we're just going to reload CryEngine3, and we're going to place our entity again. So entity, map tutorial, and drop it onto the map. Now we can see there's another mistake. So if we expand the console a little bit, you can see that it's spitting out a mistake that there's a problem with line 12. So let me switch back again, and we'll go back to line 12, and we'll see that there's a problem here. Instead of self, I've got self.activate instead of self.activate like that. So we just simply make that change, save it, and reload the script, and everything's fine again. So that's just an example of how you can make changes and fix mistakes quite easily. Everybody makes mistakes, so it's very, very easy method to do so when the console's telling you exactly what's wrong with your script at all times. So anyway, that concludes this little section. The next tutorial is going to be about creating the Flash file and doing the Actionscript associated with that, and I'm going to show you how to feed all the arguments that we created in the map tutorial LUA script into your Flash file and have the visual aspect of the map moving and animating and doing everything it needs to. So I'll see you then.